I'm Emma Rodriguez, 28, and 3 weeks ago I had the wedding of my dreams. The flowers were perfect, the venue was stunning, and everyone I loved was there to celebrate with me. Well, almost everyone. My parents found out about my wedding through a Facebook post from my cousin, and the hurt in my mother's voice when she called still echoes in my mind. But here's the thing, this story doesn't start with wedding invitations or family drama. It starts with a 5-year-old girl in a yellow dress, sitting alone at a kitchen table with a homemade cake, waiting for someone, anyone, to remember it was her birthday. What happened between that forgotten little girl and the bride who chose to forget back reveals a pattern that took me 23 years to finally break. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me, because sometimes the most painful lessons teach us the most about love. I can still smell the vanilla extract I spilled on the kitchen counter that morning. It was April 15, 1999, and I woke up with the kind of electric excitement that only comes on your birthday when you're 5 years old. I had been counting down the days for weeks, making little paper chain calendars and crossing off each day with a red crayon. I remember bouncing down the stairs in my favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny sunflowers that my grandmother had sent me for Easter. I expected to find balloons, maybe a special breakfast, certainly some acknowledgement that this was my day. Instead, I found my parents rushing around the kitchen in their usual morning chaos. Mom was gulping coffee while simultaneously packing Marcus's football gear and checking her phone. Dad had his laptop open, already deep into work emails, his tie hanging loose around his neck. My little sister Lily was in her high chair, smearing oatmeal across her face while Mom absent-mindedly spooned more into her mouth. "It's my birthday," I announced, standing in the doorway in my special dress. "That's nice, sweetheart," Mom said without looking up. "Marcus, did you remember your cleats?" "It's my birthday," I said again, louder this time. Dad glanced up from his laptop. "Happy birthday, Emma. Can you grab yourself some cereal? I'm running late for a client meeting." That was it. No song, no special breakfast, no acknowledgement that I had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Marcus grabbed his bag and headed out the door, still chewing toast. Mom strapped Lily into her car seat for daycare. Dad closed his laptop and rushed out with barely a wave goodbye, and I stood there in my yellow sunflower dress, alone in the kitchen, trying to understand why the most important day of my year was just another Tuesday morning for everyone else. I spent that morning at Mrs. Peterson's house next door, my regular babysitter, but I couldn't concentrate on the cartoons or the coloring books she offered. All I could think about was how my friends at school would ask about my birthday party, and I'd have to explain that there wasn't one. When I got home that afternoon, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my childhood. I was going to celebrate myself. I dragged a chair over to the kitchen counter and climbed up to reach the baking supplies. I had watched Mom make cakes before, and how hard could it be? I mixed flour and sugar and eggs, getting more on myself than in the bowl. I added what I thought was the right amount of everything, including way too much vanilla extract, which is why I can still smell it when I think about that day. The cake came out lopsided and slightly burned around the edges, but it was mine. I found birthday candles in the junk drawer and stuck 5 of them into my chocolate disaster. I lit them with the long lighter Dad used for the grill, even though I knew I wasn't supposed to touch it. I sat at the kitchen table by myself, looking at my crooked cake with its drooping candles, and I sang "Happy Birthday" to myself. That's when it hit me, the crushing realization that no one was coming to save this moment. No one was going to burst through the door with balloons and presents and apologies. This was it. This was my birthday. When my parents finally came home that evening, Mom noticed the mess in the kitchen first. "Emma, what did you do in here?" "I made my birthday cake," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the realization dawned on their faces. They had forgotten. Completely, utterly forgotten. "Oh honey," Mom said, her voice suddenly soft with guilt. "I'm so sorry. Work has been so crazy, and with Marcus's tournament this weekend." "It's okay," I said quickly, because even at 5, I had learned that making adults feel bad only made things worse for me, but it wasn't okay. That night, as I lay in bed still wearing my yellow dress because I didn't want the day to end, I made myself a promise. I would never again depend on other people to make me feel special. I would learn to celebrate myself, to take care of myself, to be enough for myself. I didn't know it then, but that was the day I started disappearing. The forgotten birthday wasn't an isolated incident, it was the blueprint for how my childhood would unfold. Over the next few years, I collected a small stack of school certificates and awards that might as well have been invisible. Perfect attendance, honor roll, student of the month. I brought them home with the same hopeful excitement every time, and every time they disappeared into the black hole of my family's indifference. I remember the day I won the 3rd grade spelling bee. I had studied for weeks, practicing words like necessary and separate until I could spell them backwards. When they called my name as the winner, I felt a surge of pride so intense it made my cheeks burn. Finally, I thought, finally I had something that would make them notice me. I ran all the way home, clutching the certificate in my sweaty palm. I burst through the front door, breathless with excitement. Mom, Dad, I won the spelling bee. Mom was on her hands and knees, cleaning up spilled juice from Lily's cup. That's great, honey, she said without looking up. Can you help me with this mess? Dad was in his recliner, watching Marcus practice throwing spirals in the backyard. Nice work, kiddo, he said, his eyes never leaving the window. Marcus, keep your elbow up. I stood there for a moment, certificate still in my hand, watching my parents' attention flow around me like water around a stone. Then I walked upstairs to my room and taped the certificate to my mirror, right next to the perfect attendance award from the month before. This became my ritual. Every achievement, every small victory, went straight to my bedroom mirror. Teacher appreciation notes, art contest ribbons, a certificate for reading 50 books in 2nd grade, they all found their home in my private gallery of accomplishments that no one else seemed to care about. Meanwhile, every one of Marcus's football games was a family event. Mom would pack elaborate tailgate lunches, Dad would clear his weekend schedule, and even baby Lily would be dressed in team colors. They had a special cheer they'd do from the sidelines, complete with pom-poms that Mom had bought at the sporting goods store. When Marcus scored his first touchdown, Dad actually cried. I watched from the bleachers as my normally stoic father wiped tears from his eyes, and I wondered what it would feel like to make someone that proud of me. Lily, 3 years younger than me, had her own special place in our family ecosystem. Everything she did was cause for celebration, her first steps, her first words, her adorable mispronunciations that sent my parents into fits of laughter. The refrigerator was covered with her scribbled drawings, while my carefully crafted school projects sat in a neat pile on the kitchen counter until Mom eventually threw them away during her weekly cleanings. I learned to time my attempts at getting attention. I'd wait until after Marcus's practice and before Lily's bedtime, hoping to catch my parents in that narrow window when they might have emotional bandwidth left for me. But even then, my achievements felt like interruptions to their busy lives, rather than causes for celebration. Emma got Student of the Month again, Mom would mention to Dad over dinner, the same way she might mention that we were out of milk. Good for her, Dad would reply, already moving on to discuss Marcus's upcoming tournament or Lily's preschool enrollment. I developed a strange relationship with my own success. I kept achieving because I was naturally driven and curious, but I stopped expecting anyone to care. My report cards went straight to my room after a perfunctory glance from my parents. My teacher conferences were brief affairs where Mrs. Johnson would gush about my potential while my parents nodded politely and checked their watches. By the time I was 8, I had perfected the art of being the easy child. I did my homework without being asked, kept my room clean, helped with chores, and never caused drama. I thought that if I could just be perfect enough, low maintenance enough, eventually they would notice how good I was being, but being easy just made me easier to overlook. Marcus demanded attention with his sports schedule and social life. Lily demanded attention with her needs and tantrums. I demanded nothing, so I received nothing. I started celebrating my achievements in private little ceremonies. When I got my first A+ on a book report, I made myself a special snack and ate it while reading the teacher's glowing comments. When I was chosen for the gifted program, I took myself to the library and checked out 5 new books as my own reward. The certificates kept accumulating on my mirror, creating a paper monument to my invisible excellence. Sometimes I'd stand in front of that mirror and practice acceptance speeches for awards I'd never receive in front of audiences who'd never clap for me. But even in my imagination, my parents were conspicuously absent from the crowd. Looking back now, I can see how those years of benign neglect shaped the woman I became. I learned self-reliance out of necessity, developed an internal compass that didn't depend on external validation, and cultivated the ability to find joy in my own company. These weren't entirely bad skills to have, but I also learned that my feelings didn't matter as much as other people's convenience. I learned that love was something you had to earn through perfection, and even then, it might not come. Most dangerously, I learned that I was somehow fundamentally different from other people, less worthy of attention, less deserving of celebration, less important in the grand scheme of family life. The little girl who had made herself a birthday cake was slowly disappearing, not because she was giving up, but because she was learning that invisible was the safest way to be. The centerpiece of our family room mantle was Marcus's most valuable player trophy from 8th grade football. It sat there like a golden shrine, catching the light from every angle, impossible to ignore. That trophy told the story of our family's priorities better than any photo ever could. Marcus was born to be the golden child. At 15, he had the kind of natural athleticism that made coaches salivate and parents beam with pride. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had inherited Dad's easy confidence and Mom's social charm. More importantly, he was the son who would carry on the Rodriguez name, the child who validated Dad's dreams of sports glory he'd never achieved himself. Every conversation in our house somehow circled back to Marcus. At dinner, we discuss his training schedule, his scholarship prospects, his social life, his plans for the weekend. Mom kept a special calendar just for his activities, color-coded and laminated, hanging prominently on the refrigerator. Dad rearranged his work schedule around Marcus's games and never missed a single one. "Did you see that throw in the fourth quarter?" Dad would say to anyone who'd listen, replaying Marcus's victories long after the games were over. "College scouts are going to be fighting over this kid." The investment in Marcus's success was staggering. Private coaching sessions, expensive equipment, summer camps, tournament travel, no expense was too great when it came to nurturing his potential. Dad would drive 3 hours each way to get Marcus to elite training facilities, spending weekends in hotel rooms near football fields across the state, but it wasn't just the money or time. It was the emotional investment that really highlighted the difference. When Marcus had a bad game, the whole family felt it. Mom would make his favorite meals to cheer him up. Dad would spend hours watching game footage with him, analyzing what went wrong. Even little Lily knew to give Marcus extra hugs when he was disappointed. When Marcus succeeded, we all celebrated. His touchdown passes were family victories. His team wins were Rodriguez family wins. His dreams became our dreams. His goals became our goals. In many ways, Marcus wasn't just their son, he was their project, their hope, their ticket to vicarious glory. Then there was Lily, 7 years younger than me and born with a different kind of magic, the magic of being the baby. Everything Lily did was adorable, precious, worthy of documentation and celebration. Her first day of kindergarten required a professional photo shoot. Her crayon drawings weren't just stuck on the refrigerator, they were framed and hung in the hallway. Like museum pieces, Lily had mastered the art of being cute in a way that made adults melt. She had these enormous brown eyes and a lisp that turned simple words into irresistible performances. When she said, "I love you," instead of, "I love you," Mom would literally swoon. When she drew stick figures of our family, Dad would show them to his coworkers with the pride of a man displaying Picassos. The attention Lily received was different from Marcus's achievement-based adoration, but equally consuming. She was the family entertainer, the source of comic relief, the living doll that everyone wanted to dress up and show off. Mom had an entire Instagram account dedicated to Lily's outfits and sayings. Dad carried wallet-sized photos of her to show strangers in checkout lines. Where Marcus got pressure along with his praise, Lily got pure, uncomplicated adoration. She was too young to fail at anything significant, too small to disappoint anyone, too innocent to do anything but charm everyone around her. Her needs were immediate and therefore prioritized. Her wants were simple and therefore easily fulfilled. And then there was me, the middle child who had somehow perfected the art of existing between spaces. I wasn't the promising athlete with a future to invest in. I wasn't the adorable baby with needs to be met and cuteness to be celebrated. I was the steady, reliable, unremarkable middle, the child who made good grades but not headlines, who followed rules but didn't break new ground, who existed in the comfortable, forgettable space between my siblings' blazing stars. During family dinners, I became a master of reading the conversational flow. I knew when to ask about Marcus's upcoming game and when to comment on Lily's latest preschool adventure. I learned that my role was to be the appreciative audience for their performances, the supporting character in their starring roles. I watched my parents light up in ways that seemed impossible when they talked to my siblings. Dad's whole posture changed when Marcus walked into a room, his chest puffed out with pride, his voice got deeper and more animated. Mom's face transformed into this soft, glowing expression whenever Lily climbed into her lap, as if she was holding the most precious thing in the world. I studied these transformations the way a scientist studies specimens, trying to understand what triggers caused such dramatic changes in my parents' emotional availability. I experimented with different approaches, bringing up my own achievements, trying to be funnier, attempting to be needier, but nothing I did could replicate the magic that my siblings seemed to effortlessly create. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. I wasn't special to them. Marcus was their legacy. Lily was their joy. And I was their responsibility, handled competently but without passion, managed efficiently but without excitement. That trophy on the mantle became my North Star of understanding. It represented everything I wasn't and everything I could never be in my family's eyes. It caught the light beautifully, demanded attention effortlessly, and stood as a permanent reminder of what mattered most in the Rodriguez household. I was learning that some children are born to be celebrated, and others are born to do the celebrating. The acceptance letter from State University arrived on a Tuesday in March, and I stared at it for a full 5 minutes before I could process what it meant. Not just acceptance, a full academic scholarship that would cover tuition, room, and board. For years of freedom, paid for by the grades that no one at home had ever seemed to notice. I held that letter like it was made of gold, reading it over and over to make sure I hadn't imagined the words. This was my ticket out, my chance to discover who Emma Rodriguez could be when she wasn't defined by her role as the invisible middle child. When I showed my parents the acceptance letter, their reaction was predictably muted. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, glancing up from helping Lily with an art project. "State University has a good reputation." Dad nodded approvingly while scrolling through his phone. "Smart choice staying in-state. Much more affordable. No celebration dinner. No proud phone calls to relatives. No tears of joy or overwhelming hugs. Just practical acknowledgement that I had successfully handled another responsibility without requiring their intervention. Marcus's football scholarship had warranted a family party and a congratulatory cake. My academic scholarship warranted a pat on the head and a return to regularly scheduled programming, but their indifference couldn't diminish my excitement. For the first time in my life, I was making a decision that was entirely mine, pursuing a path that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations or dreams. I was going to study psychology, fascinated by human behavior and relationships in ways that probably stemmed from years of analyzing my own family dynamics. Moving into the dorms in August felt like stepping into a parallel universe. My roommate, Jessica, was from a small town in Nebraska, and she talked about her family with such obvious affection that I initially thought she was exaggerating. She called her parents every Sunday, not out of obligation but because she genuinely missed them. She had photos of family vacations covering half of her side of the room, pictures where everyone looked genuinely happy to be together. "Your family seems really close," I said one evening, watching her FaceTime with her little brother about some drama at his high school. "They're pretty great," she said simply, as if having parents who were actively interested in your life was the most normal thing in the world. College was a revelation in ways I hadn't expected. In my classes, professors knew my name within the first week. They remembered my contributions to discussions, built on my ideas, and encouraged me to explore topics that fascinated me. For the first time, my intelligence wasn't just acknowledged, it was celebrated and cultivated. I discovered that I had opinions about things, strong feelings and passionate interests that had been dormant during years of trying not to take up too much space. I loved my abnormal psychology class, found myself captivated by developmental theory, and wrote papers that my professors described as insightful and mature. Even more surprising was how easily I made friends. Without the constant backdrop of family dynamics that made me feel invisible, I found that I was actually quite likable. I was a good listener, having perfected that skill in a household where no one listened to me. I was independent and low maintenance, qualities that made me an easy friend. I was thoughtful and observant, able to notice when people needed support or encouragement. Sarah from my sociology class started inviting me to study groups. Mike from the psychology lab asked me to be his partner for a research project. Amy from my dorm floor knocked on my door when she needed someone to talk through a problem with her boyfriend. Suddenly, I was part of a community where my presence mattered, where people noticed when I wasn't around and actively sought out my company. The contrast with my family life was stark and sometimes painful. When Jessica's parents visited for homecoming weekend, they took us all out to dinner and asked detailed questions about my classes, my professors, my plans for the future. They listened to my answers with genuine interest, asked follow-up questions, and treated me like someone worth knowing. I went back to my dorm room that night and cried, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that this was what parental interest looked like. My own parents visited exactly once during my freshman year, a brief Saturday afternoon trip to check on things. They toured my dorm room, met Jessica politely, and took me to lunch at the campus dining hall. The conversation was stilted and surface level, questions about my meal plan, my class schedule, whether I needed anything practical. "Are you happy here?" Mom asked as they were preparing to leave. It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard because no one had ever asked me that before. Not about college, not about high school, not about anything. I almost started crying right there. In the parking lot. "Yes," I said. "I really am." And I was. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. I was challenged intellectually, supported emotionally, and valued for who I was rather than overlooked for who I wasn't. I had friends who sought out my company and professors who believed in my potential. I had space to discover my own interests, develop my own opinions, and make my own choices without having to navigate around everyone else's needs and priorities. The girl who had spent 18 years learning to disappear was finally learning how to be seen. And it turned out that when given the chance to be visible, I was actually quite remarkable. That acceptance letter became the artifact of my transformation, the piece of paper that changed everything, the key that unlocked a door I hadn't even known existed. It represented possibility, independence, and the radical idea that I deserved to be somewhere that wanted me. College wasn't just my education. It was my awakening. The acceptance letter from State University arrived on a Tuesday in March, and I stared at it for a full 5 minutes before I could process what it meant. Not just acceptance, a full academic scholarship that would cover tuition, room, and board. For years of freedom, paid for by the grades that no one at home had ever seemed to notice. I held that letter like it was made of gold, reading it over and over to make sure I hadn't imagined the words. This was my ticket out, my chance to discover who Emma Rodriguez could be when she wasn't defined by her role as the invisible middle child. When I showed my parents the acceptance letter, their reaction was predictably muted. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, glancing up from helping Lily with an art project. "State University has a good reputation." Dad nodded approvingly while scrolling through his phone. "Smart choice staying in state. Much more affordable. No celebration dinner. No proud phone calls to relatives. No tears of joy or overwhelming hugs. Just practical acknowledgement that I had successfully handled another responsibility without requiring their intervention. Marcus's football scholarship had warranted a family party and a congratulatory cake. My academic scholarship warranted a pat on the head and a return to regularly scheduled programming, but their indifference couldn't diminish my excitement. For the first time in my life, I was making a decision that was entirely mine, pursuing a path that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations or dreams. I was going to study psychology, fascinated by human behavior and relationships in ways that probably stemmed from years of analyzing my own family dynamics. Moving into the dorms in August felt like stepping into a parallel universe. My roommate, Jessica, was from a small town in Nebraska, and she talked about her family with such obvious affection that I initially thought she was exaggerating. She called her parents every Sunday, not out of obligation but because she genuinely missed them. She had photos of family vacations covering half of her side of the room, pictures where everyone looked genuinely happy to be together. "Your family seems really close," I said one evening, watching her FaceTime with her little brother about some drama at his high school. "They're pretty great," she said simply, as if having parents who were actively interested in your life was the most normal thing in the world. College was a revelation in ways I hadn't expected. In my classes, professors knew my name within the first week. They remembered my contributions to discussions, built on my ideas, and encouraged me to explore topics that fascinated me. For the first time, my intelligence wasn't just acknowledged, it was celebrated and cultivated. I discovered that I had opinions about things, strong feelings and passionate interests that had been dormant during years of trying not to take up too much space. I loved my abnormal psychology class, found myself captivated by developmental theory, and wrote papers that my professors described as insightful and mature. Even more surprising was how easily I made friends. Without the constant backdrop of family dynamics that made me feel invisible, I found that I was actually quite likable. I was a good listener, having perfected that skill in a household where no one listened to me. I was independent and low maintenance, qualities that made me an easy friend. I was thoughtful and observant, able to notice when people needed support or encouragement. Sarah from my sociology class started inviting me to study groups. Mike from the psychology lab asked me to be his partner for a research project. Amy from my dorm floor knocked on my door when she needed someone to talk through a problem with her boyfriend. Suddenly, I was part of a community where my presence mattered, where people noticed when I wasn't around and actively sought out my company. The contrast with my family life was stark and sometimes painful. When Jessica's parents visited for homecoming weekend, they took us all out to dinner and asked detailed questions about my classes, my professors, my plans for the future. They listened to my answers with genuine interest, asked follow-up questions, and treated me like someone worth knowing. I went back to my dorm room that night and cried, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that this was what parental interest looked like. My own parents visited exactly once during my freshman year, a brief Saturday afternoon trip to check on things. They toured my dorm room, met Jessica politely, and took me to lunch at the campus dining hall. The conversation was stilted and surface level, questions about my meal plan, my class schedule, whether I needed anything practical. "Are you happy here?" Mom asked as they were preparing to leave. It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard because no one had ever asked me that before. Not about college, not about high school, not about anything. I almost started crying right there. In the parking lot. "Yes," I said. "I really am." And I was. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. I was challenged intellectually, supported emotionally, and valued for who I was rather than overlooked for who I wasn't. I had friends who sought out my company and professors who believed in my potential. I had space to discover my own interests, develop my own opinions, and make my own choices without having to navigate around everyone else's needs and priorities. The girl who had spent 18 years learning to disappear was finally learning how to be seen. And it turned out that when given the chance to be visible, I was actually quite remarkable. That acceptance letter became the artifact of my transformation, the piece of paper that changed everything, the key that unlocked a door I hadn't even known existed. It represented possibility, independence, and the radical idea that I deserved to be somewhere that wanted me. College wasn't just my education. It was my awakening. Graduation day arrived with the kind of spring sunshine that makes everything feel possible. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, psychology degree in hand, cum laude honors announced to a crowd that included exactly 3 members of my family. Mom, Dad, and Lily had made the 2-hour drive for the ceremony. Marcus was at a football camp that couldn't be rescheduled. I scanned the audience as my name was called, seeing Jessica's entire extended family cheering wildly for her, Sarah's parents recording everything on 3 different devices, and my own family sitting quietly in their seats like they were attending someone else's graduation. No whoops of excitement, no embarrassing displays of pride, just polite applause that felt more obligatory than celebratory. After the ceremony, we went to lunch at a chain restaurant near campus. The conversation was the same surface-level small talk that had characterized all our interactions for the past 4 years. They asked about my job prospects, my plans for moving back home temporarily, whether I needed help packing my dorm room. No one asked how I felt about graduating, what I was most proud of, or what I'd learned about myself during these transformative years. So you'll be home for a few weeks before you start job hunting, Mom said, cutting her salad into precise pieces. Actually, I already have a job lined up, I said. I'm starting at the counseling center downtown in 2 weeks. I'll be working with at-risk youth while I save money for graduate school. Dad looked up from his phone. That's good, honey. Steady income is important. No congratulations on landing a job in my field. No questions about what the work would involve. No acknowledgement that I had been planning and preparing for my future while they had been focused on other things. Just practical approval that I wouldn't be a financial burden. That diploma became my declaration of independence. It represented 4 years of discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to be invisible, 4 years of building confidence and competence and connections that had nothing to do with my family of origin. It was proof that I could succeed without their attention, thrive without their validation, and create a life that fulfilled me without their input. Moving into my first apartment was a celebration of one. I found a cozy 1-bedroom place within walking distance of work, furnished it with secondhand finds and garage sale treasures, and created a space that was entirely mine. No family photos on the walls, no reminders of the house where I'd spent 18 years feeling like a guest. Just books and plants and artwork that spoke to me, arranged exactly how I wanted them. My job at the counseling center was both challenging and deeply fulfilling. I worked with teenagers who had been written off by everyone else, kids from broken homes, young people aging out of foster care, adolescents struggling with addiction and mental health issues. In their stories, I recognized echoes of my own feelings of invisibility and abandonment, though their circumstances were far more dire than mine had ever been. You really get it, said Mia, a 16-year-old who had been bouncing between foster homes since she was 8. Most adults just see us as problems to solve. You see us as people. I did see them as people, complex, wounded, resilient people who deserved attention and care and hope. Working with them reminded me daily of my own strength, my own ability to overcome neglect and create meaning from difficult experiences. It also reinforced how abnormal my family dynamics had been, how children should be cherished and celebrated rather than overlooked and managed. I started creating my own traditions during those early years of independence. Birthday celebrations that lasted a whole weekend instead of being forgotten entirely. Thanksgiving dinners with friends who had also escaped complicated family situations. Christmas mornings spent volunteering at the shelter rather than sitting through tense family gatherings where I felt like an observer rather than a participant. The distance from my family wasn't born of anger or dramatic confrontation. It was simply a natural drift that happened when I stopped trying so hard to be noticed and started building a life where I was already seen. Phone calls became less frequent, visits became shorter and more sporadic, and I found that I didn't miss the constant feeling of performing for an audience that wasn't really watching. I developed friendships that felt like chosen family. College friends who stayed in touch, colleagues who became close confidants, neighbors who invited me to barbecues and game nights. These relationships were based on mutual interest and genuine affection rather than obligation and proximity. People wanted to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they were related to me by accident of birth. Graduate school applications became my next project, carefully researched and meticulously prepared without any input from my family. I was accepted to 3 programs, chose the one that offered the best combination of financial aid and specialization in family therapy, and made plans to move to a new city where I could continue building the life I had started creating in college. When I called to tell my parents about my acceptance, their response was predictably understated. "That's nice, dear," Mom said. "How long will the program take?" 3 years for the master's degree, then I'll probably pursue my doctorate," I explained. "That's a lot of school," Dad said in the background. "Make sure you're not just putting off entering the real world." I almost laughed at the irony. I had been living in the real world since I was 5 years old, taking care of myself emotionally and practically in ways that most children never have to. What I was doing now wasn't putting off reality, it was finally creating the reality I wanted instead of settling for the one I had been given. That diploma wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a bridge between the girl who had learned to disappear and the woman who was learning to take up space in the world with confidence and purpose. It represented my ability to not just survive neglect, but to transform it into empathy, strength, and the determination to help others who had experienced similar wounds. I was building a life where I mattered, where my presence was valued, where my voice was heard. And for the first time since I was 5 years old, I felt truly at home. I met David Chin on a rainy Thursday evening in graduate school. We were both in the library, competing for the last available study corral during finals week. He offered to share the space, and we spent the next 4 hours taking turns quizzing each other on developmental psychology theories. By the time the library closed, I knew 3 things about him: he was brilliant, he was kind, and he saw me in a way that made me feel like I'd been invisible my whole life until that moment. David was everything my family wasn't. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered details about my day, my dreams, my fears. When I told him stories about my childhood, he didn't try to minimize my experiences or suggest that I was being oversensitive. Instead, he held space for my pain and helped me understand that my feelings were valid and my experiences mattered. His family was a revelation. The Chens were warm, boisterous, and genuinely interested in each other's lives. Sunday dinners at their house were 3-hour affairs filled with laughter, storytelling, and good-natured arguments about everything from politics to the best way to prepare dumplings. David's parents asked me detailed questions about my work, my studies, my opinions on current events. His sister called me just to chat, sending funny memes and checking in when she knew I had important presentations or exams. "Your girlfriend is delightful," Mrs. Chen told David within earshot of me during one of those Sunday dinners. "She's smart and thoughtful, and she makes you happy. We can see it in your eyes." I excused myself to use the bathroom and cried quietly in their powder room, overwhelmed by the simple experience of being noticed, appreciated, and welcomed so completely. This was what family could look like when people actually cared about each other. David and I dated for 3 years before he proposed, 3 years of slowly learning to trust that someone could love me not despite my invisibility, but because he saw through it to who I really was underneath. He noticed when I was stressed about school, celebrated my small victories, and created traditions that made me feel special and valued. The proposal happened on a Saturday morning in the botanical garden where we'd had our first official date. David had somehow orchestrated the perfect moment. My best friend Sarah was, coincidentally, nearby with a camera. My favorite coffee shop had, randomly, set up a table with my preferred pastries, and the spring flowers were in full bloom, creating a backdrop that looked like something from a fairy tale. But the most beautiful part wasn't the setting or the planning. It was the ring itself, his grandmother's vintage engagement ring, a delicate Art Deco design that his family had been saving for the woman who would become part of their family. Mrs. Chen had pressed it into David's hands weeks earlier, telling him that she had been hoping for years that he would find someone worthy of wearing it. "Emma Rodriguez," David said, getting down on one knee right next to the rose garden, "you are the most remarkable person I've ever known. You're strong and kind and brilliant, and you make every day better just by being in it. Will you marry me?" The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for my finger all along. I said yes through tears of joy, feeling for the first time in my life like I was someone's first choice, someone's priority, someone's dream come true. Sarah captured every moment. The surprise on my face, David's nervous smile, the way I kept staring at the ring like I couldn't believe it was real. Later, looking at those photos, I was struck by how radiant I looked, how completely present and happy I appeared. I had never seen myself look so genuinely joyful. My first instinct after the initial excitement wore off was to call my parents and share the news. Despite years of feeling overlooked by them, some part of me still hoped that major life events might break through their emotional unavailability. This was big news, the kind of announcement that should matter even to parents who had never quite figured out how to make me feel important. "Mom," I said when she answered the phone, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice, "I have amazing news. David proposed." There was a brief pause before she responded. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. When did this happen?" I told her about the botanical garden, the ring, how thoughtful and romantic the whole proposal had been. I could hear the television in the background, some cooking show that seemed to be holding more of her attention than my engagement announcement. "That's really nice, Emma," she said. "Have you set a date yet?" "We're thinking next spring," I said. "We want to finish graduate school first, but we're so excited to start planning." "Smart to wait until you're both settled," she said. "I should probably let your father know. He's watching the game with Marcus." No squeals of excitement. No questions about the ring or the proposal story. No requests to see pictures or meet with David to celebrate. Just practical acknowledgement that her daughter was getting married, filed away like any other piece of family information that needed to be processed and stored. When I hung up the phone, David noticed the change in my mood immediately. "How did they take the news?" he asked, pulling me into a hug. "Exactly how I expected them to," I said, and realized that was both the saddest and most liberating thing I could have said, but David's family more than made up for my parents' lukewarm response. Mrs. Chen cried actual tears of joy when we told her. Mr. Chen shook David's hand solemnly and then broke into a huge grin, pulling me into a bear hug and welcoming me officially to the family. David's sister immediately started planning an engagement party and texting her friends about her soon-to-be sister-in-law. That ring became my talisman, a constant reminder that I was chosen, valued, and loved. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that feeling of being someone's priority, someone's dream come true. It represented everything my family had never given me: unconditional love, genuine celebration, and the deep security of knowing that I mattered to someone more than anything else in the world. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be cherished. The wedding planning process began with the kind of excitement I had only read about in magazines. David and I spent hours on Pinterest, creating vision boards and dreaming about our perfect day. We talked about flowers and venues, music and menus, all the details that would come together to celebrate our love story in front of the people who mattered most to us. Mrs. Chen immediately offered to help with planning, bringing decades of event organizing experience and genuine enthusiasm for creating something special. She had coordinated David's sister's wedding 2 years earlier, and the photos from that celebration showed the kind of joyful, inclusive gathering that I had always imagined weddings should be. "The most important thing," Mrs. Chen told me over tea one afternoon, "is that your wedding reflects who you are as a couple. Everything else is just decoration." I found myself automatically including my parents in early planning conversations, partly out of habit and partly out of some persistent hope that a wedding might finally be the event that would spark their interest in my life. After all, even the most emotionally distant parents usually got excited about their children's weddings, right? I called my mother a week after the engagement to talk about potential dates and venue ideas. I had done preliminary research on 3 locations, each with different price points and styles, thinking she might want to visit them with me or at least hear about the options. "We're thinking about May 15th, I told her. "It's a Saturday, and the weather should be perfect. We found this beautiful garden venue about an hour from the city." "May 15th, she repeated, and I could hear her flipping through what sounded like a calendar. "That should work fine. Is it expensive?" "It's within our budget," I said. "David's parents offered to help with some of the costs, and we've been saving since we got engaged." "That's good that his parents are contributing," she said. "Weddings are so expensive these days." I waited for her to ask about the venue, the style of ceremony we were envisioning, whether we had thoughts about flowers or music or any of the details that I was dying to share with someone. Instead, there was silence punctuated by the sound of her typing on her computer. "Mom, would you like to come look at venues with me?" I asked finally. "Oh, honey, I'm so busy with work right now. And you seem to have everything under control. Just let me know what you decide." The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. No questions about my dress, my vision for the day, how I was feeling about getting married. No offers to help with planning, no suggestions based on her own wedding experience, no mother-daughter bonding over what should have been one of the most exciting times in my life. I tried with my father too, thinking maybe he'd be interested in the logistics or the financial planning aspects of the wedding. When I called to update him on our venue choice, he was cordial but distant. "Sounds like you've got it figured out," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." "What about walking me down the aisle?" I asked. "We haven't talked about the ceremony details yet." "Of course I'll walk you down the aisle," he said, but his tone suggested it was more obligation than privilege. Just tell me when and where to show up. The contrast with David's family was stark and increasingly painful. Mrs. Chen wanted to know everything about our plans, offering suggestions and support without being pushy or controlling. David's father asked thoughtful questions about our budget and offered practical advice about vendors and logistics. His sister created a shared Pinterest board where we could all exchange ideas and inspiration. Have you thought about having a brunch reception? David's sister suggested during one of our planning sessions. I've seen some beautiful morning ceremonies that feel so romantic and intimate. What about incorporating some of your cultural traditions? Mrs. Chen asked. I'd love to learn more about customs that are important to your family. I realized with a sinking feeling that I didn't really know what traditions were important to my family because we had never talked about such things. My parents had never shared stories about their own wedding, never explained the significance of any family customs, never treated our heritage as something worth celebrating or preserving. When I asked my mother about family traditions we might include in the ceremony, her response was characteristically brief. We're not really traditional people, she said. Just do whatever makes you happy. It wasn't that I wanted my parents to take over the planning or impose their vision on our wedding. I would have been grateful for any sign of genuine interest, any indication that they cared about this milestone in my life beyond their obligation to show up and write a check. I found myself planning around their indifference, making decisions based on what would require the least involvement from them rather than what would make the day most meaningful. I chose a venue that was easy to find and had ample parking because I knew they wouldn't want to deal with complicated logistics. I planned a ceremony that was short and straightforward because I couldn't count on them to participate in anything more elaborate. Meanwhile, David's family was already planning their own celebrations, a rehearsal dinner that Mrs. Chen insisted on hosting, a welcome party for out-of-town guests, a post-wedding brunch for close family. They were creating a whole weekend of festivities around our marriage because they genuinely wanted to celebrate our happiness. The wedding venue contract became my artifact of independence, a document that represented my right to celebrate myself and my love story regardless of my family's emotional availability. When I signed it, I felt both excited about the future and grieved about the past, excited to marry David and create our own family traditions, but sad that my parents couldn't seem to muster enthusiasm for what should have been one of the happiest times in my life. Planning our wedding was teaching me that I could create the celebration I wanted with or without my parents' participation. But it was also forcing me to confront the reality that their pattern of emotional absence wasn't going to magically change just because I was getting married. Some daughters get mothers who cry happy tears when they try on wedding dresses. Some get fathers who tear up when they talk about walking their little girls down the aisle. I was learning to accept that I wasn't going to be one of those daughters, and that acceptance was both heartbreaking and liberating. I was planning the wedding I wanted, surrounded by people who were genuinely excited to celebrate with us. The question that was slowly forming in the back of my mind was whether that group of people needed to include my parents at all. David's parents insisted on throwing us an engagement party, and their enthusiasm was both touching and overwhelming. Mrs. Chen spent weeks planning the perfect celebration, a garden party at their home with twinkling lights, homemade appetizers, and carefully curated music that told the story of David's and my relationship. We want everyone who loves you both to be able to celebrate together, she explained as she showed me the hand-lettered invitations she had designed. This is such a happy time, and happiness should be shared. The guest list included David's extended family, college friends who had become chosen family, colleagues from our respective programs, and neighbors who had watched our relationship bloom over the past 3 years. It was going to be intimate but festive, the kind of gathering where everyone genuinely wanted to be there. I mailed my parents' invitation with a handwritten note explaining how much it would mean to me to have them there. This felt like the kind of event that might finally capture their interest, a party in their honor as the bride's parents, an opportunity to meet David's family and be celebrated as important figures in my life. The RSVP deadline came and went without a response from my parents. I called my mother a week after the deadline, trying to keep my voice light and casual. Did you get the invitation to our engagement party? I asked. Oh yes, that's so sweet of David's parents, she said. When is it again? Saturday the 18th. From 2 to 6, I said. It's just a casual garden party at their house. I really hope you can make it. Let me check our calendar, she said, and I heard the familiar sound of pages flipping. I think Marcus has a game that day, but let me double-check. Marcus was now a senior in college, still playing football, still commanding the family's weekend schedule even though he was hundreds of miles away at his own university. The idea that my engagement party might conflict with one of his games, which they could watch on television, felt like a perfect metaphor for our family's priorities. If Marcus has a game, could you maybe watch it later? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. This party is really important to me. Of course, honey. We'll figure something out. Let me talk to your father and get back to you. She never got back to me. 3 days before the party, I called again. We're still planning to attend, aren't we? I asked directly. Oh, the engagement party, she said, as if she had completely forgotten about it. Yes, we'll try to make it. What time did you say it started? Try to make it. Not, we'll be there, or, we wouldn't miss it, or any of the responses I had hoped for. Just a half-hearted promise to try, as if my engagement party was an optional social obligation rather than a significant milestone in their daughter's life. The day of the party arrived with perfect spring weather. David's house was transformed into something magical, fairy lights strung between trees, tables covered with flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden, and the smell of her famous dumplings wafting from the kitchen. Guests started arriving at 2 o'clock, bringing gifts and congratulations and genuine excitement for our future together. By 3 o'clock, every invited guest had arrived except my parents. I kept glancing toward the driveway, making excuses for their lateness while trying to enjoy the celebration that David's family had put so much love into creating. They'll be here, I told David when he noticed my distraction. They're probably just running late. At 4 o'clock, my parents finally arrived, rushing in with minimal apologies and maximum disruption. They looked uncomfortable and out of place, as if they had accidentally wandered into someone else's party. Dad was checking his phone within minutes of walking in. Mom clutched her purse like she was planning a quick escape. Mrs. Chen graciously welcomed them, offering drinks and introducing them to other guests. I watched as she tried to engage them in conversation about me, about our relationship, about their hopes for our future together. Their responses were polite but perfunctory, the kind of small talk you make with strangers at networking events. Emma is such a wonderful young woman, Mrs. Chen said warmly. You must be so proud of her achievements. Yes, she's always been very independent, Mom replied, which wasn't exactly the same thing as expressing pride. And David absolutely adores her, Mrs. Chen continued. They're perfect for each other. That's nice, Dad said, already looking toward the door. I realized that my parents didn't know how to talk about me in positive terms because they had never really thought about me in positive terms. They had no stories to share about my childhood accomplishments, no anecdotes about my personality or interests, no expressions of excitement about my future. To them, I was the reliable, low-maintenance daughter who had always taken care of herself. They had no practice celebrating me because they had never seen me as someone worth celebrating. The most painful moment came when David's sister proposed a toast to our engagement. Everyone gathered around with their drinks raised, faces glowing with happiness and anticipation. To Emma and David, she said, two people who found their perfect match in each other. May your marriage be filled with all the love and joy that you bring to everyone around you. The group cheered and applauded, calling out additional well wishes and expressions of love. I looked around at all these people who were genuinely excited about our happiness, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the chosen family I had found. But when I looked for my parents in the crowd, I saw Dad checking his watch and Mom gathering her purse. They had arrived late, contributed nothing to the celebration, and were already planning their exit before the formal toasts were even finished. We should probably head out soon, Mom said quietly to me during a brief lull in the festivities. We want to catch the second half of Marcus's game. They left at 5 o'clock, an hour before the party was scheduled to end. Their goodbye was rushed and impersonal, a brief hug, a generic "thanks for including us," and a promise to talk soon that we all knew was meaningless. After they left, the party continued with even more warmth and energy, as if their departure had lifted some invisible tension from the gathering. David's family and our friends celebrated us with genuine enthusiasm, sharing stories about our relationship and expressing excitement about our future together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed a perfect microcosm of my entire relationship with my parents. They had shown up late, participated minimally, and left early to prioritize something else. They had treated my engagement party like an inconvenient obligation rather than a joyful celebration. That invitation became my artifact of realization, the piece of paper that represented their continued pattern of making me feel like an afterthought in my own life. Even when I explicitly asked them to celebrate me, even when I made it easy for them to show up and be supportive, they still couldn't manage to prioritize my happiness over their own comfort and convenience. The engagement party taught me that my parents weren't going to change just because the stakes got higher. If they couldn't be present for a simple celebration in my honor, how could I expect them to be truly present for my wedding? For the first time, I began to seriously question whether they deserved to be there at all. Wedding dress shopping was supposed to be one of those quintessential mother-daughter experiences, the kind of bonding moment that appears in every romantic comedy and bridal magazine. I had been quietly looking forward to it, imagining my mother's Tears of joy when I found the dress, her helpful opinions about styles and fits, maybe even some rare moment of emotional connection over this milestone in my life. But when I mentioned dress shopping during one of our infrequent phone calls, my mother's response was characteristically lukewarm. "That sounds fun," she said in the tone people use when discussing someone else's hobby. "Have you looked at any stores yet?" "I made appointments at 3 boutiques," I explained. "I was hoping you might want to come with me to the first one. It's on Saturday afternoon." There was a pause that lasted just long enough to confirm what I already knew she was going to say. "Oh honey, I wish I could, but I promised Lily I'd help her with her science project. You understand." Lily was now 15 and perfectly capable of completing her own science projects, but somehow my wedding dress shopping was less important than my sister's homework. I tried to keep the disappointment out of my voice as I assured my mother that I understood, that it was fine, that I could handle it myself. Mrs. Chen immediately offered to come with me when David mentioned my predicament, and her enthusiasm was both touching and painful. "I would be honored to help you find your dress," she said, her eyes actually tearing up at the prospect. "This is such a special moment, and every bride deserves to have people who love her there to celebrate it." David's sister also wanted to join us, along with my best friend Sarah from college. Suddenly I had an entire support team of women who were genuinely excited to help me find the perfect dress, none of whom were related to me by blood. The morning of our appointment, Mrs. Chen picked me up with a bag full of snacks and a bottle of champagne for celebrating when we found the one. She had made a whole day of it, with lunch reservations and a mani-pedi appointment afterward. This was clearly as exciting for her as it was for me. "I've been looking forward to this for weeks," she said as we drove to the boutique. "When David first brought you home, I started hoping that someday I'd get to be part of your wedding planning. You're like the daughter I never had." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were unkind, but because they highlighted everything my own mother had never offered me. Mrs. Chen was treating this experience like the privilege it was, while my own mother had treated it like an inconvenience to be avoided. The boutique was everything I had dreamed of: soft lighting, comfortable seating areas, and rows of beautiful gowns waiting to be tried on. The consultant, Maria, greeted us warmly and listened carefully as I described my vision for the wedding and the style of dress I thought I wanted. "The most important thing," Maria said, "is how the dress makes you feel. We want you to feel like the most beautiful version of yourself." The first few dresses were lovely but not quite right. Too much beading, too dramatic a train, too fitted through the hips. But I was having fun with the process, enjoying the encouragement from my little support team and the luxury of being the center of attention in the most positive way. Then Maria brought out the 5th dress, and I knew immediately that it was different. It was elegant but not overdone, fitted but comfortable, classic but with unique details that felt perfectly like me. When I stepped out of the dressing room, the reaction from my cheering section was immediate and unanimous. "Oh my God, Emma," Sarah breathed. "That's it. That's your dress." Mrs. Chen had tears streaming down her face. "You look absolutely radiant," she whispered. "David is going to cry when he sees you walking down the aisle." David's sister was taking pictures from every angle, already planning how to capture the perfect shot on the wedding day. Even Maria, who had probably seen hundreds of brides try on thousands of dresses, seemed genuinely moved by how perfect this one looked on me. I stood in front of the 3-way mirror, looking at myself in this dress that made me feel like a bride, like a woman worthy of celebration and love. But instead of pure joy, I felt a complex mixture of happiness and grief. I was thrilled to have found my perfect dress, but I was also mourning the mother-daughter moment that would never happen. "Do you want to call your mom and tell her about the dress?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, as if she could sense the complicated emotions I was experiencing. "Maybe later," I said, not wanting to spoil this beautiful moment with my mother's inevitable lukewarm response, but Mrs. Chen's suggestion made me realize something profound. I didn't want to call my mother about the dress. I didn't want to risk having this perfect moment diminished by her lack of enthusiasm. I didn't want to hear her say, "That's nice, honey," about the dress that made me feel like a princess. I didn't want to share something this special with someone who had never learned how to make me feel special. Instead, I wanted to preserve this moment exactly as it was, surrounded by women who were genuinely excited for me, who saw my happiness as their happiness, who understood that finding your wedding dress was about more than just clothing. It was about transformation, about becoming a bride, about stepping into a new chapter of life with confidence and joy. We celebrated with champagne right there in the boutique, toasting to love and happiness and the beginning of my new life with David. Mrs. Chen insisted on paying for the dress as her wedding gift to me, refusing to hear any arguments about the expense. "This is what mothers do," she said simply. "They help their daughters feel beautiful on the most important day of their lives." That wedding dress became my artifact of self-acceptance, representing my ability to celebrate myself even when my own family couldn't. It symbolized the realization that I could create meaningful moments and beautiful memories without waiting for my parents to show up and participate. It represented my growing understanding that chosen family could be more supportive and loving than biological family. When I got home that evening, I hung the dress in my closet and looked at it for a long time. It was more than just a beautiful gown, it was proof that I deserved to be celebrated, that I was worthy of love and attention and care. It represented the bride I was becoming, not just for David, but for myself. I never did call my mother about finding the dress. Some moments were too precious to risk having them diminished by someone who had never learned how to rejoice in my joy. Instead, I kept this moment safe, protected by the love of people who actually knew how to love me back. For the first time in my life, I understood the difference between the family you're born into and the family that truly sees you. And I was learning that my wedding could be perfect without including people who had never figured out how to make me feel perfectly loved. Creating our wedding guest list started as an exciting exercise in love and logistics. David and I sat at my kitchen table with notebooks, laptops, and takeout containers, making lists of all the people who had shaped our lives and supported our relationship. College friends, graduate school colleagues, extended family members, work mentors. We wanted to surround ourselves with everyone who had contributed to our love story. David's list filled up quickly with names accompanied by stories. Oh, we have to invite Professor Martinez. He's the one who introduced us to that research project where we really fell in love with each other's minds. And my cousin Rebecca, she always asks about you and was so excited when we got engaged. And the Johnsons from down the street, they've basically adopted me as a third son. Each name on David's list came with context, relationship history, and genuine affection. These weren't just people he felt obligated to invite, they were people who had been meaningful parts of his life and who would be genuinely excited to celebrate our marriage. My list was shorter and took longer to compile. Not because I had fewer meaningful relationships, college and graduate school had blessed me with wonderful friendships, but because I found myself hesitating over certain names that should have been automatic inclusions. I wrote Mom and Dad at the top of my family section, then stared at their names for a long time. Tradition dictated that parents should be at their children's weddings. Society expected it. Wedding etiquette demanded it. But for the first time in my life, I found myself questioning whether tradition and expectation were good enough reasons to include people who had never really celebrated me. Tell me about your family guest list, David said, looking up from his notebook where he had been enthusiastically describing his great-aunt who told the best stories at family gatherings. I hesitated, pen hovering over the paper. Well, obviously my parents. And Marcus and Lily. Maybe a few aunts and uncles. What about your grandparents? David asked. You never talk about them. My dad's parents died when I was little, and my mom's parents live across the country. We're not really close. I realized as I said it that this wasn't entirely accurate. We weren't close because my parents had never prioritized maintaining those relationships, just like they had never prioritized so many things that might have enriched my childhood. What about family friends? People who watched you grow up? I tried to think of family friends who had been meaningful presences in my life, and came up empty. My parents had acquaintances and colleagues, but no deep friendships that had included me or shaped my development. There were no honorary aunts and uncles, no family friends who had celebrated my achievements or offered guidance during difficult times. The contrast with David's list was stark and increasingly uncomfortable. His family section overflowed with people who had loved him throughout his life, relatives who remembered his childhood interests, family friends who had cheered at his graduations, extended family members who had maintained close relationships across decades and distance. Maybe we should keep the wedding smaller, I suggested, suddenly feeling self-conscious about my modest list. More intimate. Are you sure? David asked gently. I want you to invite everyone who's important to you. This is your day too. That's when it hit me, the people who were truly important to me were already on my list. My close friends from college, my graduate school cohort, my colleagues from the counseling center, the chosen family I had built through years of mutual care and support. The people I was questioning weren't important to me, they were just expected. I found myself conducting a mental exercise that was both liberating and devastating. If my parents weren't at my wedding, what would I actually miss? Their enthusiastic participation in the celebration? They had never been enthusiastic about any of my milestones. Their emotional support during this important transition? They had never offered emotional support during any of my transitions. Their joy in my happiness? They had never seemed particularly invested in my happiness. What I would miss was the idea of having parents who cared, the fantasy of finally having a moment significant enough to break through their emotional unavailability. But missing an idea wasn't the same as missing actual people or actual relationships. David, I said slowly, what if we didn't invite my parents? He looked up from his list, clearly surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, what if we only invited people who actually want to celebrate us? People who have shown up for us, who care about our happiness, who add joy to our lives rather than just obligation. David set down his pen and really looked at me. Tell me what you're thinking. So I did. I told him about the engagement party, about the dress shopping, about 23 years of feeling like an afterthought in my own life. I explained how every attempt to include my parents in wedding planning had felt like pulling teeth, how their lack of enthusiasm was already casting a shadow over what should be the happiest time in my life. I keep trying to force them to care, I said, and they keep showing me that they don't. Why am I planning my wedding around people who have never planned anything around me? David listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and helping me process feelings I had been suppressing for months. He didn't try to talk me out of my doubts or insist that family was family regardless of their behavior. Instead, he helped me examine what I really wanted for our wedding day. What would make you happiest? He asked finally. Being surrounded by people who are genuinely excited to be there, I said without hesitation. People who celebrate us, who have invested in our relationship, who want to party with us because they love us, not because they feel obligated to show up. We spent the rest of the evening revising our guest list, and with each name I removed, I felt lighter. Marcus, who had never shown interest in my life beyond perfunctory sibling obligations. Lily, who was still too young and self-absorbed to really understand the significance of marriage. Various relatives who knew me only as the quiet one and who would attend out of family duty rather than personal affection, and finally, my parents. The moment I crossed their names off the list, I felt a complex rush of emotions: grief for the parents I had always wanted them to be, relief at not having to manage their indifference on my wedding day, guilt for making such an unconventional choice, and unexpected joy at the possibility of a celebration that would be entirely about love rather than obligation. That guest list became my artifact of empowerment, representing the moment I chose my own happiness over family expectations. It symbolized my growing understanding that I didn't owe anyone a place in my life simply because of genetics or tradition. It represented the radical idea that my wedding could be exactly what I wanted it to be, filled with exactly the people I wanted to share it with. For the first time in my life, I was planning something entirely around my own joy rather than around other people's comfort or convenience. And it felt absolutely revolutionary. The decision crystallized on a Tuesday evening in February, 6 months before our wedding date. I was updating our planning spreadsheet when my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe she was calling to ask about centerpieces, or to offer help with invitations, or simply to check in about how wedding planning was going. "Hi, Mom," I answered, already opening my wedding notebook in case she wanted to discuss details. "Emma, I need to ask you a favor," she said without preamble. "Could you change your wedding date?" I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" "Your wedding date," she repeated matter-of-factly. "May 15th conflicts with Marcus's graduation from college. He's getting his degree that weekend, and we've already made all the arrangements to attend his ceremony." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. My wedding, the event I had been planning for months, the date we had chosen carefully to accommodate family schedules, the celebration that David's family had already built their spring plans around, was being treated like a scheduling conflict to be resolved in Marcus's favor. "Mom," I said slowly, "we sent save the dates 6 months ago. Everyone has already requested time off work and made travel arrangements." "I know, honey, but Marcus's graduation is really important. It's his college graduation. You understand." The casualness of her request was breathtaking. She wasn't asking if it would be possible to change the date. She wasn't expressing regret about the conflict or acknowledging the enormity of what she was suggesting. She was simply expecting me to rearrange my wedding because Marcus's graduation took priority. "What if Marcus comes to the wedding and you watch his graduation online?" I suggested, though I already knew what her response would be. "Oh, we couldn't miss his actual graduation ceremony," she said, as if the idea was absurd. "This is his big day. His big day. Not our big day. Not a day that might be equally significant in the life of their other child. Just his big day, as if my wedding was a minor inconvenience that could be easily rescheduled to accommodate more important family events." "I can't change the wedding date, Mom," I said firmly. "Everything is already booked and paid for." "Well, then I guess we'll have to miss your wedding," she said with a sigh that suggested this was an unfortunate but unavoidable outcome. "I'm sure you'll understand." After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for 20 minutes, trying to absorb what had just happened. My own mother had called to tell me that my wedding was less important than my brother's graduation, an event that happened every semester for thousands of students, compared to an event that would happen once in my lifetime. When David came home from his evening class, he found me crying at the kitchen table, still clutching my wedding planning notebook. "What happened?" he asked, immediately pulling me into his arms. I told him about the phone call, about my mother's casual assumption that our wedding could be rescheduled to accommodate Marcus's graduation, about her matter-of-fact acceptance that she would miss my wedding rather than ask Marcus to attend virtually or make any other compromise. "She's not coming to our wedding," I said through tears. "She chose Marcus's graduation over my wedding without even hesitating." David held me while I cried, not trying to minimize my pain or suggest solutions that might salvage the situation. He just let me feel the full weight of this final confirmation that I would never be my parents' priority, no matter how significant the occasion. "I'm done," I said finally, pulling back to look at him. "I'm done trying to make them care about me. I'm done planning my life around people who will never plan theirs around me." "What do you want to do?" David asked gently. "I want to delete them from my phone," I said. "I want to stop sending them updates about wedding planning. I want to remove their names from our guest list officially and permanently. I want to plan a wedding that's about celebrating love with people who actually love us back." That night, I made the most liberating decision of my adult life. I went into my phone's contact list and deleted the group chat I had created for wedding updates. I removed my parents from our wedding planning email list. I took their names off our vendor communication lists and our rehearsal dinner reservations. Most symbolically, I deleted their contact information from my phone entirely. It wasn't an angry gesture or a dramatic statement. It was simply a recognition that these people had never really been present in my life anyway, so making their absence official wouldn't actually change anything except my own expectations. David supported my decision completely, never once suggesting that I was overreacting or that family bonds should trump personal happiness. Instead, he helped me think through the practical implications and offered to handle any awkward questions from vendors or relatives. "What if they try to contact you?" he asked. "Then I'll know they actually care enough to reach out when they realize they're not invited," I said. "But honestly, I don't think they will. I think they'll be relieved not to have to attend an event they never wanted to go to anyway." The act of deleting their contact information felt like shedding a weight I had been carrying for 23 years. No more hoping they would call to check on wedding planning. No more preparing for disappointment when they responded to my updates with lukewarm acknowledgement. No more organizing my emotional energy around people who had never organized theirs around me. Instead, I could focus entirely on creating the perfect celebration with people who were genuinely excited to be there. David's family, who treated our engagement like a cause for celebration. My college friends, who had been asking for regular updates and offering to help with every detail. My colleagues, who understood what it meant to find someone who truly sees and values you. I started planning our wedding as if my parents had never existed, and the relief was overwhelming. No more worrying about whether they would participate in ceremonies or photos. No more planning around their comfort level or their scheduling conflicts. No more making decisions based on what would require the least emotional labor from people who had never provided emotional labor for me. For the first time since we got engaged, I was planning a wedding that was entirely about joy and love and celebration, without any undercurrent of anxiety about managing my parents' indifference. That deleted contact became my artifact of liberation, representing my final decision to choose my own happiness over family obligation. It symbolized the moment I stopped waiting for my parents to become the people I needed them to be and started protecting myself from the pain of their continued absence. I was planning a wedding that would be perfect in every way that mattered, surrounded by love, filled with joy, and completely free from the shadow of people who had never learned how to celebrate me, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. May 15th dawned with the kind of perfect spring weather that seems designed for weddings: clear blue skies, gentle sunshine, and just enough breeze to keep the temperature comfortable. I woke up in the bridal suite at our venue, surrounded by my bridesmaids and feeling a profound sense of peace that I hadn't expected. For months, I had wondered if I would feel sad or conflicted on my wedding day about my parents' absence. I had prepared myself for pangs of grief or moments of doubt about my decision to exclude them. Instead, I felt nothing but pure, uncomplicated joy. Sarah knocked on the door with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. "Good morning, beautiful bride," she said, pulling back the curtains to let in more sunlight. "How are you feeling?" "Perfect," I said, and meant it completely. "I feel absolutely perfect." Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later with the flowers, bouquets she had helped me design and arrange herself, using blooms from her own garden mixed with white roses and baby's breath. She had insisted on creating them personally because, she said, The bride's flowers should be made with love. These are gorgeous, I breathed, holding up my bouquet. The mix of colors and textures was exactly what I had envisioned, feminine but not overly sweet, elegant but not pretentious. David is going to cry when he sees you, she said, adjusting a few stems. He's been nervous all morning, pacing around the house and checking his watch every 5 minutes. Getting ready became a celebration in itself. My bridesmaids, Sarah, David's sister, and 2 friends from graduate school, turned the preparation into a party. We played music, shared stories about David and me, and took photos that captured the pure happiness of the morning. When it came time to put on my dress, Mrs. Chen helped me step into it and carefully fastened each button along the back. Looking at myself in the full-length mirror, I felt transformed. Not just into a bride, but into a woman who was finally, completely surrounded by love. You look radiant, Mrs. Chen said softly, her eyes filling with tears. I know your parents aren't here, but please know that David's father and I couldn't be prouder to welcome you into our family. You're the daughter we always hoped David would find. I hugged her carefully, trying not to wrinkle my dress, and realized that I wasn't missing anything by not having my mother there. Mrs. Chen had provided everything a mother should provide. On her daughter's wedding day, emotional support, practical help, unconditional love, and tears of joy, the ceremony took place in the garden pavilion, decorated with fairy lights and more flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden. As the music began and I prepared to walk down the aisle, I felt a moment of curiosity about who would escort me. We had decided that I would walk myself down the aisle, a symbolic gesture of my independence and self-determination, but as I reached the back of the ceremony space, David's father appeared beside me. Would you do me the honor of letting me walk you to my son? He asked quietly. I know I'm not your father, but I promise I will love you like a daughter for the rest of my life. I took his arm, too moved to speak, and together we walked toward David, who was waiting at the altar with tears streaming down his face. The guests rose as we approached, and I saw nothing but love and joy on every face, friends who had supported our relationship from the beginning, colleagues who had celebrated our engagement, chosen family who had invested in our happiness. There was no awkward empty space where my parents should have been sitting. There were no painful reminders of absence or loss. There was only an abundance of people who wanted to be there, who were genuinely excited to witness our marriage, who saw our love as something worth celebrating. David's vows were beautiful and personal, referencing inside jokes and shared dreams and the way we had grown together over the past 4 years. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at our guests and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. David, I said, you taught me what it means to be truly seen and valued. You showed me that love isn't something you have to earn through perfection, it's something that exists just because you exist. Thank you for choosing me every day, and for surrounding us with people who know how to choose love too. Our kiss at the end of the ceremony was met with cheers and applause that felt genuinely enthusiastic. As we walked back down the aisle together, I felt like I was floating. This was exactly what I had wanted, a celebration of love that was pure and joyful and completely free from obligation or complicated family dynamics. The reception was everything I had dreamed of. David's father gave a toast that welcomed me into their family with such warmth that half the guests were crying. Sarah spoke about our friendship and how happy she was to see me find someone who appreciated how amazing I was. David's sister shared funny stories about our courtship that had everyone laughing. No one asked about my parents' absence. No one seemed to notice that there were missing pieces in our family structure. Everyone was too busy celebrating the love that was present to worry about the people who weren't there. We danced to our favorite song, surrounded by guests who were genuinely happy for us. We cut our cake while people cheered and took photos. We laughed and cried and celebrated until the very last song. As the evening wound down and we said goodbye to our guests, I realized that this was the first major milestone in my life where I had felt completely, authentically celebrated. Not managed or acknowledged or tolerated, but truly celebrated by people who were honored to be part of our special day. Those wedding photos became my artifact of pure joy, capturing a day when I was surrounded by nothing but love and celebration. In every picture, I'm glowing with happiness, surrounded by people who chose to be there because they wanted to witness our love story. There are no forced smiles or awkward family dynamics, just pure, uncomplicated joy. Looking at those photos later, I couldn't find a single thing I would change about our wedding day. It had been absolutely perfect, not because everything went according to plan, but because it had been filled with exactly the right people celebrating for exactly the right reasons. I had finally experienced what it felt like to be the center of attention in the most loving, supportive way possible. And it was everything I had always dreamed it could be. The honeymoon in Costa Rica was blissful, 7 days of complete disconnection from the outside world, no phones, no social media, just David and me exploring rainforests and beaches and falling even more deeply in love as newlyweds. We had specifically chosen a remote eco-lodge that prided itself on digital detox, wanting our first week of marriage to be entirely about us. We returned home on a Sunday evening, tanned and relaxed and still floating on the cloud of our perfect wedding and honeymoon. I didn't even think to check my phone until Monday morning, when I plugged it into charge and was greeted by an overwhelming flood of missed calls, text messages, and social media notifications. The first thing I saw was a Facebook post from my cousin Rebecca, Marcus's girlfriend, who had apparently attended our wedding as a guest of some college friends. The post had been shared dozens of times and had accumulated hundreds of comments. "Just attended the most beautiful wedding," she had written, accompanied by a series of photos from our reception. Emma and David looked so happy, and the celebration was absolutely magical. Congratulations to the happy couple. The photos were lovely, candid shots of David and me dancing, laughing with guests, cutting our cake. In every image, we looked radiantly happy, surrounded by people who were genuinely celebrating with us. But as I scrolled through the comments, I realized that our wedding had become the subject of intense family drama that I had been blissfully unaware of. "Wait, Emma got married," one of my aunts had commented. "When did this happen?" "Beautiful wedding. Where were Emma's parents though?" another relative had asked. "I can't believe we weren't invited," posted a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, but the comment that made my stomach drop was from my mother. "This is the first time hearing about Emma's wedding. I can't believe my own daughter got married without telling her family." I stared at that comment for a long time, trying to process the audacity of it. My mother, who had chosen Marcus's graduation over my wedding, who had never shown interest in any of my wedding planning, who had made me feel like an afterthought for my entire life, was now publicly portraying herself as the victim of my decision. The phone started ringing almost immediately, calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to know what had happened and why they hadn't been invited. I let them go to voicemail, needing time to process this unexpected aftermath. David found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately sitting down beside me. I showed him the Facebook post and the resulting comment thread, watching his expression shift from confusion to anger as he read my mother's public portrayal of the situation. "She's making it sound like you disappeared and got married in secret," he said. "She's not mentioning that she chose not to come." The voicemails were even worse. Extended family members who had never shown particular interest in my life were now calling to express their hurt and confusion about being excluded from my wedding. Distant relatives were demanding explanations for why they hadn't received invitations. People who had never supported my relationship with David were now acting wounded that they hadn't been included in our celebration. The most painful call came from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who had always been the family peacemaker. "Emma, honey, I'm so confused," her voicemail said. "Your mother is beside herself about missing your wedding. She says you didn't tell anyone in the family about it. I just don't understand what happened. Can you please call me back and explain?" I realized that my mother had crafted a narrative that painted her as the abandoned parent rather than the disinterested one. She had apparently told the extended family that I had excluded them all without explanation, conveniently leaving out the part where she had chosen Marcus's graduation over my wedding and shown no interest in participating in any of the planning. The family group chat that I had left months earlier was apparently exploding with speculation and criticism. According to David's sister, who had heard from mutual friends, various relatives were expressing shock and disapproval about my decision to exclude family from such an important event. "Maybe we should set the record straight," David suggested. "Post something explaining what really happened." But as I thought about it, I realized I didn't want to engage in a public defense of my choices. The people who truly knew me and cared about me had been at our wedding. The people who were now expressing hurt and outrage were the same people who had never invested in my happiness or well-being. Instead, I made another liberating decision. I posted my own Facebook status, accompanied by one of my favorite photos from the wedding, a picture of David and me surrounded by our wedding party, all of us laughing at something David's sister had said. "Just returned from the most amazing honeymoon with my incredible husband," I wrote. "Our wedding was absolutely perfect, intimate, joyful, and surrounded by the people who have supported our relationship from the beginning. We're so grateful for everyone who celebrated with us and who continues to celebrate our happiness." I didn't mention my family's absence. I didn't defend my guest list choices. I didn't engage with the drama or try to correct the narrative my mother had created. I simply shared my joy and gratitude for the celebration we had actually had. The responses to my post were overwhelmingly positive. Friends from college, colleagues, wedding guests, and David's family all responded with love and support. Several people even commented that they could see how happy we looked and how beautiful the celebration had been, but my post also served another purpose. it made clear to anyone paying attention that my wedding had been intentional and joyful, not secretive or shameful. The photos showed a bride and groom who were surrounded by love and celebration, not people who had eloped to avoid family drama. That Facebook post became my artifact of truth-telling, representing my refusal to be ashamed of choosing my own happiness or to engage in family drama that I hadn't created. It symbolized my commitment to focusing on the love and joy in my life rather than the criticism from people who had never been invested in my well-being. Over the following days, the family drama gradually died down as other events captured people's attention. But the experience taught me an important lesson about the cost of setting boundaries with toxic family dynamics. Sometimes protecting your own happiness means accepting that other people will tell stories about your choices that aren't accurate or fair. I learned that I couldn't control my family's narrative about my wedding, but I could control my own response to their criticism. I could choose to focus on the beautiful celebration David and I had created rather than the hurt feelings of people who had never prioritized my feelings. The wedding had been perfect. The aftermath was messy. But I was learning that sometimes perfection requires accepting messiness from people who can't handle being excluded from events they never really wanted to be part of anyway. The phone call came on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the Facebook drama had died down. David and I were cooking dinner together, laughing about something that had happened at work, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Something told me to answer it anyway. Emma? The voice was my mother's, but strained and shaky in a way I had never heard before. We need to talk. I gestured to David that I needed to take the call privately, and walked into our bedroom, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, though I wasn't sure if it was from anxiety or anticipation. How did you get this number? I asked, realizing that she must have had to work to reach me since I had deleted her contact information months earlier. I called David's parents, she said. Emma, how could you do this to us? How could you get married without telling your own family? Her voice cracked on the last words, and I could tell she was crying. Part of me felt the familiar pang of guilt that came whenever my mother expressed pain, the old programming that told me I was responsible for managing her emotions and protecting her from hurt, but a stronger part of me felt calm and clear about what had actually happened. I did tell you about the wedding, Mom, I said quietly. I told you about the engagement, the date, the venue. I invited you to the engagement party. I called you about wedding planning. You chose Marcus's graduation over my wedding, remember? That's different, she said, her voice getting defensive. That was a scheduling conflict. You could have worked with us to find a solution. The solution you suggested was that I change my wedding date, I reminded her. You told me you would miss my wedding rather than ask Marcus to attend his graduation. Virtually. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted from tears to anger. You're being dramatic, Emma. Families work through scheduling conflicts all the time. The fact that you chose to exclude us entirely over one conversation shows how selfish you've become. Selfish. The word hung in the air between us, and I felt something snap inside me. 23 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as an afterthought, and now I was selfish for finally prioritizing my own happiness. Tell me about my childhood, Mom, I said suddenly. What? She sounded confused by the change of direction. Tell me about my childhood. Tell me about my birthdays. My achievements, my interests. Tell me about what made me happy or what I struggled with. Tell me about who I was as a kid. The silence stretched so long that I wondered if the call had been dropped. I don't understand what you're asking, she said finally. I'm asking you to tell me about me, I said. Because in 28 years, you've never shown any real interest in who I am as a person. You've never celebrated my achievements, never noticed my struggles, never made me feel like I mattered to you at all. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. We've always loved you kids equally. Love isn't the same as attention, Mom. And attention isn't the same as celebration. When was the last time you asked me about my work? My dreams? My fears? When was the last time you made me feel like you were genuinely happy for my happiness? You're being ridiculous, she said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. Just because we're not as emotional as David's family doesn't mean we don't care about you. You missed my engagement party to watch Marcus's football game on TV, I said. You asked me to change my wedding date for his graduation. You've never asked to meet David's family or shown interest in our relationship. You didn't even notice when I stopped sending you wedding planning updates because you never responded to them anyway. Each point landed with the weight of accumulated evidence, and I could hear my mother struggling to find responses that would justify years of emotional neglect. We raised you to be independent, she said finally. We didn't think you needed as much attention as the other kids. You mean I was easier to ignore, I said. I was the low-maintenance kid who took care of herself, so you didn't have to invest any emotional energy in me. That's not how we saw it, she said, but even she seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Then how did you see it, Mom? Because, from my perspective, I spent my entire childhood feeling invisible in my own family. I spent years trying to earn your attention, your pride, your interest, and I never could. So I stopped trying. The crying started again, but this time it sounded more like guilt than hurt. We didn't mean to make you feel that way, she said through tears. We thought you were fine. You never complained, you never caused problems, you always seemed so capable. I was 5 years old when you forgot my birthday, I said. I made my own cake and sang "Happy Birthday" to myself. What 5-year-old should have to do that? We apologized for that, she said weakly. You apologized for forgetting. You never apologized for the pattern. You never changed the behavior. You just kept treating me like an afterthought and expected me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you could spare. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother alternating between guilt, defensiveness, and attempts to minimize the impact of their emotional neglect. She tried to blame it on being busy with work, on Marcus's demanding sports schedule, on Lily's needs as the youngest child. She tried to reframe their indifference as respect for my independence, but I was done accepting excuses for behavior that had shaped my entire sense of self-worth. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I said finally. I'm just done. I'm done trying to force you to care about me. I'm done planning my life around people who have never planned theirs around me. I'm done protecting your feelings when you've never protected mine. So what does that mean? She asked, her voice small and scared. It means I'm choosing to surround myself with people who actually want to celebrate me. People who ask about my life because they're genuinely interested in the answer. People who show up when it matters and who make me feel valued just for being myself. And we're not those people, she asked. I paused, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the question I had been avoiding for years, the truth I had been too afraid to speak out loud. No, I said gently. You're not. The call ended with promises to work on things and do better that we both knew were empty. But for me, it ended with something much more valuable, the complete clarity that I had made the right choice about my wedding and my life. That phone call log became my artifact of truth-telling, representing the moment I finally spoke my reality out loud without apologizing for it. It symbolized my refusal to accept blame for protecting myself from emotional neglect, and my commitment to surrounding myself with people who knew how to love me properly. I had finally stopped trying to earn love from people who had never figured out how to give it. The weeks following my conversation with my mother brought a complicated mix of relief and grief that I hadn't expected. Having finally spoken my truth felt liberating, but it also triggered a mourning process for the family relationships I had always hoped might eventually develop into something meaningful. The extended family fallout was swift and predictable. Within days of my phone call with Mom, I started receiving messages from various relatives who had apparently been recruited as intermediaries. Aunt Linda called to suggest family therapy. Uncle Robert sent a long email about the importance of forgiveness. My grandmother, who I hadn't heard from in 2 years, left a voicemail about how family feuds hurt everyone involved. Emma's always been dramatic. I heard through the grapevine that my mother had told people. She's angry about things that happened when she was a child, and she's punishing us for not being perfect parents. The narrative had shifted again. Now I wasn't just the secretive daughter who had excluded her family from her wedding, I was the ungrateful, vindictive child who was holding grudges and tearing the family apart over minor childhood disappointments. Marcus called me for the first time in months, his voice awkward and uncertain. Mom's really upset, he said without preamble. She's been crying a lot, and Dad doesn't know what to do. Can't you just apologize and move on? Apologize for what? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. For missing the wedding? I guess. For whatever happened when we were kids. You know how Mom gets when there's family drama. The casualness of his response was telling. He wasn't calling because he understood my perspective or wanted to support me through a difficult time. He was calling because my parents' emotional distress was creating inconvenience for him, and he wanted me to fix it by backing down. I'm not apologizing for protecting my own happiness, I said. And I'm not responsible for managing Mom's emotions about the consequences of her choices. Come on, Emma, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. Don't you think you're being a little extreme? So they weren't perfect parents. Nobody's perfect. The conversation revealed something I had suspected but never fully acknowledged. Marcus genuinely didn't understand what I was talking about. Because he had lived a completely different childhood experience. He had been celebrated, prioritized, and made to feel important. My experiences of neglect and invisibility were foreign to him because they had never been his reality. Lily's response was different but equally painful. Now 18 and about to start college, she sent me a text that said simply, "I don't understand why you're being so mean to mom and dad. They love you." I realized that Lily had grown up watching my parents overlook me, and to her, that treatment probably seemed normal, just the way Emma was treated in our family. She had never questioned why I received less attention or celebration because that's simply how our family hierarchy had always functioned. The hardest part wasn't the criticism from extended family or the lack of understanding from my siblings. The hardest part was the grief. I found myself mourning the parents I had never had, the mother who should have wanted to go wedding dress shopping with me, the father who should have been excited to walk me down the aisle, the family that should have celebrated my achievements and supported my dreams. David suggested that I start seeing a therapist to help process these complex emotions, and I found Dr. Sarah Martinez, a family therapy specialist who understood the particular pain of emotional neglect in families that appeared functional from the outside. "What you experienced is called emotional neglect," Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. "It's often harder to identify than other forms of childhood trauma because it's about what didn't happen rather than what did happen." She helped me understand that my feelings were valid, that my decision to exclude my parents from my wedding was a healthy boundary rather than a vindictive punishment, and that the grief I was experiencing was a normal part of accepting reality. About my family relationships. "You're not mourning the parents you had," she said. "You're mourning the parents you needed and deserved to have." The therapy sessions became a safe space to explore the full impact of growing up emotionally invisible. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize patterns in my adult relationships where I had accepted less than I deserved because I had been conditioned to believe that minimal attention was normal and appropriate. She also helped me understand that my parents' inability to celebrate and nurture me wasn't a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of their own emotional limitations and family of origin issues that they had never addressed. Hurt people," she said. "But you get to decide whether you want to continue that cycle or break it." I started journaling as part of my therapy process, and those sessions became another form of healing. Writing about my childhood experiences, my wedding decision, and my hopes for the future helped me process emotions that I had been suppressing for years. The journal entries revealed patterns I hadn't consciously noticed, how I had learned to make myself small to avoid disappointment, how I had developed hypervigilance about other people's emotional states while ignoring my own needs, how I had confused love with obligation and attention with care. But the entries also revealed my strength and resilience. I had not only survived emotional neglect, I had used it to develop empathy, independence, and the ability to create meaningful relationships with people who knew how to love properly. David's family continued to be a source of healing and support during this difficult period. Mrs. Chen checked in regularly, not to pry into family drama but to make sure I knew I was loved and valued. David's father sent me articles about plants for our garden, continuing to treat me like a beloved daughter whose interests mattered to him. "You know," Mrs. Chen said during one of our Sunday dinners, "families aren't just about blood relations. Sometimes the most important family relationships are the ones we choose." I started to understand that healing from emotional neglect wasn't about getting my parents to finally see and celebrate me, it was about learning to see and celebrate myself, and surrounding myself with people who already knew how to do that. Those therapy session notes became my artifact of healing, representing my journey toward understanding the wounds of emotional neglect and developing the tools to create healthier relationships. They symbolized my commitment to breaking cycles of emotional unavailability and building a life filled with genuine connection and mutual celebration. I was learning that I couldn't change my family of origin, but I could change how I responded to them. I couldn't make them capable of loving me properly, but I could choose to love myself properly and accept love from people who knew how to give it. For the first time in my life, I was grieving the family I had never had while simultaneously celebrating the family I had chosen. And slowly, that grief was transforming into gratitude for the people who had shown me what love actually looks like when it's freely and joyfully given. 6 months after my wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning while David slept in and I sipped coffee in our sun-filled kitchen, I found myself writing a letter that I never intended to send. It started as a therapy exercise that Dr. Martinez had suggested, writing to my younger self, but it became something much more powerful. "Dear 5-year-old Emma," I began, and the words flowed out like they had been waiting years to be written. "I know you're sitting at that kitchen table in your yellow sunflower dress, confused about why no one remembered your birthday. I know. You're trying so hard to understand what you did wrong, why you're not worth celebrating, why you have to make your own cake and sing your own song. I want you to know that you did nothing wrong. You were worth celebrating then, and you're worth celebrating now. The people who should have seen your light were too caught up in their own darkness to notice how brightly you were shining. You're going to spend a lot of years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. You're going to make yourself smaller and quieter, thinking that if you could just be perfect enough, easy enough, they would finally notice you. But here's what I learned that I wish I could tell you now: you don't have to earn love. Real love sees you exactly as you are and celebrates you for it. You're going to feel invisible for a long time, but you're not invisible. You're just surrounded by people who have forgotten how to really see. There are other people out there, wonderful people, who will see you immediately and love you fiercely and make you feel like the most important person in their world. You're going to build a beautiful life, little one. You're going to help other kids who feel invisible just like you do. You're going to marry a man who thinks the sun rises and sets with your smile. You're going to have a mother-in-law who cries happy tears about your happiness and a father-in-law who treats you like precious treasure. You're going to have friends who remember your birthday without being reminded, who celebrate your achievements like they're their own victories, who show up for you in ways that will heal wounds you didn't even know you had, and someday, you're going to realize that the family who couldn't celebrate you gave you the greatest gift of all. They taught you to celebrate yourself. They taught you independence and resilience and the ability to create your own joy. They taught you to recognize real love when you finally find it. You're going to have to make some hard choices about protecting your own happiness. People might not understand why you choose yourself over obligation, why you prioritize joy over guilt, why you surround yourself with love instead of settling for indifference. That's okay. You don't have to justify choosing happiness. Keep being curious. Keep being kind. Keep believing that you deserve to be celebrated, because you absolutely do. Every achievement, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday, all of it is worth celebrating because you are worth celebrating. The little girl who made her own birthday cake grew up to plan her own perfect wedding, surrounded by people who know how to love properly. She chose joy over obligation, chosen family over biological family, and her own happiness over everyone else's comfort. And it was the best decision she ever made. You are seen. You are valued. You are loved beyond measure. Love, your future self, writing. That letter felt like the final piece of my healing puzzle clicking into place. I wasn't just processing my past anymore, I was honoring it, integrating it, and using it as the foundation for a life filled with authentic connection and celebration. Our first wedding anniversary approached with the kind of anticipation I had never felt about family events as a child. David and I planned a quiet celebration, dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, followed by dancing to our wedding song in our living room. Simple, intimate, and filled with the kind of love I had learned to recognize and cherish. Mrs. Chen called that morning to wish us a happy anniversary, her voice full of genuine joy for our happiness. David's sister sent flowers. Our friends from the wedding posted throwback photos and sweet messages about our love story. I felt surrounded by celebration in a way that still sometimes surprised me with its abundance. I had built a life where my milestones mattered, where my achievements were acknowledged, where my happiness was a source of joy for the people around me. I had created the kind of family environment that I had always craved as a child, warm, supportive, and filled with people who showed up for each other consistently and enthusiastically. The work I was doing at the counseling center had evolved, too. I had developed a specialty in working with young adults who had experienced emotional neglect, helping them recognize that their feelings were valid and their experiences mattered. In their stories, I saw echoes of my own journey, and in their healing, I found additional purpose for the pain I had experienced. You really get it, one of my clients told me, a 22-year-old named Anna whose parents had treated her academic achievements as obligations rather than accomplishments. Most people don't understand how it feels to be invisible in your own family. I do understand, I told her. And I also understand that invisible children grow up to become incredibly resilient adults who know how to love properly because they've learned what real love looks like. My marriage to David continued to be a daily education in healthy relationship dynamics. He celebrated my small victories and supported me through challenges. He was interested in my thoughts and feelings, invested in my dreams and goals, and consistently made me feel like his favorite person in the world. After years of emotional scarcity, this abundance of care and attention still sometimes overwhelmed me with gratitude. Do you ever miss them? David asked one evening as we walked through the botanical garden where he had proposed, now one of our favorite places to spend time together. I considered the question seriously. Did I miss my parents? Did I miss Marcus and Lily? Did I miss the idea of having a close extended family? I miss the idea of them, I said finally. I miss having parents who were excited about our wedding, siblings who wanted to be part of our celebration. But I don't miss the actual people they were in my life, because those people never really showed up for me anyway. Do you think you'll ever try to reconnect? He asked. Maybe, I said. But only if they're willing to acknowledge what happened and do the work to change. I'm not interested in relationships that require me to pretend my experiences weren't real or to accept crumbs of attention and call it love. As we walked, I thought about how much my life had changed since that 5-year-old girl in the yellow dress had decided to celebrate herself. I had learned to recognize my own worth, to demand the kind of love I deserved, and to create spaces where celebration and joy were the norm rather than the exception. That letter to my younger self became my final artifact, a representation of complete healing and self-acceptance, a bridge between the child who had felt invisible and the woman who had learned to take up space with confidence and grace. It symbolized my journey from seeking external validation to providing internal validation, from hoping for love to creating love, from being celebrated by others to celebrating myself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where I kept our wedding photos, my therapy notes, and other mementos from this transformative period of my life. Someday, if David and I have children, I'll share it with them, not as a cautionary tale about family dysfunction, but as a love story about resilience, healing, and the beautiful life you can build when you refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Our wedding had been perfect not because everything went according to plan, but because it had been filled with people who knew how to love us properly. Our marriage was thriving not because we never faced challenges, but because we faced them together with the support of a chosen family who celebrated our happiness as their own. I was no longer the invisible child waiting for someone to notice her. I was a woman who knew her own worth, who surrounded herself with love and celebration, who had learned that the most important birthday song is the one you sing for yourself, not because no one else will, but because you finally understand that you are absolutely worth celebrating. The little girl in the yellow dress had grown up to become exactly who she was meant to be, seen, valued, loved, and finally, completely home.